Welcome to Ethical Point. Today, we are diving into a truly fascinating and honestly highly relevant UPSC 2023 General Studies Paper 4 case study. If you've ever wondered how public administrators navigate the incredibly tricky waters of workplace egos, innovation, and ethical leadership, well, you are in the exact right place. Let's get right into it. Put yourself in the shoes of a newly appointed additional director general for a moment. You've got this highly experienced chief architect who is just 6 months away from retirement, leading a massive legacy-defining public project. But you also have a brilliant new hire, and her innovative ideas are seriously bruising that senior officer's ego. It's causing massive friction in the office. So here's the million-dollar question. How do you balance a fragile ego with a critical public project without losing your absolute top talent? That is the dramatic administrative dilemma we're unpacking today in this explainer. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the classic workplace conflict, then map out the key stakeholder interests, explain the core ethical dilemmas, evaluate our actionable leadership options, implement some long-term institutional measures, and finally, wrap it up with a solid UPSC answer writing strategy. All right, part 1, the classic workplace conflict. Let's look at this dynamic. On one side, we have our retiring chief architect. He's legacy-driven, he has a vast amount of experience, but he's deeply insecure about being overshadowed. On the other side, we have Seema. She's a newly joined senior architect, trained at the prestigious Manchester School of Architecture. She is bringing these incredible, time-saving, innovative ideas to the table. But because of the chief's constant public humiliation and passive-aggressive behavior, she is entirely losing her confidence. It's a classic organizational clash, right? You've got a seniority-driven ego colliding head-on with merit-driven innovation. Moving right along to part 2, mapping key stakeholder interests. Before we can solve any crisis, we have to know exactly who is affected. It's like a giant puzzle. As the ADG, your primary interest is ethical leadership, employee welfare, and, of course, getting the project done on time. But the chief architect, he just wants to secure his legacy and get his recognition. Then there's Seema. She just wants to contribute her expertise while maintaining her emotional well-being and basic human dignity. And let's not forget the government and the citizens. They just want a high-quality infrastructure project completed on time. So the real challenge for the ADG is figuring out how to honor that duty to project completion without sacrificing Seema's fundamental right to a safe workplace. Section 3, Core Ethical Dilemmas Explained. Let's hit the brakes for a second and define the core issue here. Workplace harassment isn't just physical. It is any unwelcome conduct that creates an intimidating, hostile, or abusive work environment. In layman's terms, it's any behavior like the chief architect shouting or constantly correcting Seema in front of her peers that strips away a person's dignity. In our case study, this passive-aggressive bullying is fundamentally destroying an employee's psychological safety. We also need to talk about meritocracy. Simply put, this means the absolute best ideas should win, regardless of who they come from. Your professional recognition should be based on your capability and your actual contributions, not just how many years you've kept an office chair warm. The chief architect is demanding seniority-based deference, which completely crushes that meritocratic ideal where Seema's brilliant suggestions should be celebrated. Honestly, it is a textbook example of professional jealousy. And this creates a massive web of ethical dilemmas. First, you have professional jealousy actively undermining the institutional interest of completing a project efficiently. Second, there's a severe power imbalance. You have a senior male superior intimidating a younger female colleague, introducing a highly toxic gender dynamic. Third, we're seeing a direct trade-off between hitting project deadlines and protecting an employee's emotional well-being. And finally, if Seema resigns, which she is seriously contemplating, the organization faces a massive brain drain. They literally lose top-tier, Manchester-trained talent all because of bad management. Okay, let's look at part 4, evaluating actionable leadership options. What can the ADG actually do in real life? Let's break down the options. Option 1 is formal disciplinary action. Sure, this gives Seema immediate relief, but it's highly punitive and could completely derail the project just 6 months before the finish line. Option 2, ignore the situation. Maybe the project finishes, but the bullying continues, Seema resigns, and you completely fail as an ethical leader. Option 3 is to transfer Seema. It protects her, yes, but it deprives the project of her innovations and essentially punishes the victim. That brings us to our recommended choice: mediate and collaborate. It requires a lot of emotional intelligence, but it is absolutely the best option to retain both talents, integrate new innovations, and ensure the project succeeds. Now, how do you actually execute this mediation? Let's map it out step by step. Step 1, meet privately with Seema, validate her feelings, and formally document her suggestions in the project minutes so she finally gets the credit she deserves. Step 2, have a very frank counseling session with the chief architect about professional ethics. You have to remind him that respectful leadership is mandatory. And step 3, clearly define their professional roles to ensure joint ownership of the project. This beautifully balances the organizational goals with employee welfare. This brings us to Section 5, implementing long-term institutional measures. Fixing the immediate crisis just isn't enough. We need preventative policies. A foundational tool for this is 360-degree feedback. In layman's terms, this is a performance review system where you aren't just graded by your boss. You also receive anonymous feedback from your peers and, crucially, your subordinates. It is a highly practical check against passive-aggressive leadership because it forces managers to actually be accountable for how they treat their junior staff. We have to transition the entire office culture. We're moving from a rigid, seniority-based ego culture where leaders suppress ideas, demand blind obedience, and view juniors as competition to something much healthier. We need a merit-based collaboration culture where senior leaders actively mentor their successors, integrate fresh innovations, and generously share the credit. To establish that safe, merit-focused culture, here are the concrete long-term policies you need. First, introduce mentorship guidelines, where retiring officers are actually rewarded for how well they transition their knowledge. Second, mandate gender sensitization and POSH Act training to strictly enforce the respectful workplace. Third, create an internal innovation cell so junior staff can bypass insecure middle managers and pitch ideas directly to top leadership. And lastly, set up a robust, confidential grievance redressal mechanism that includes dedicated mental health support.
Finally, Section 6, UPSC Answer Writing Strategy.
Let's translate everything we've talked about into a high-scoring framework for your mains exam. When you sit down to write a 20-marker case study, structure is absolutely everything. Start your introduction with standard definitions of organizational conflict or ethical leadership. Next, explicitly map the stakeholders and identify their primary interests. Then evaluate your administrative options using a clear pros and cons framework, and boldly state your recommended option. Finally, structure your way forward or conclusion around a transition plan, explaining exactly how the organization can evolve from an ego-driven hierarchy to a merit-based collaborative team. And this brings us to a perfect, ready-made concluding line for your exam papers. A leader's true legacy is not just the buildings they leave behind, but the professionals they build up. So the next time you face a clash of egos, ask yourself, will you be the leader who builds walls to protect your pride, or the one who builds bridges for the next generation? Think about it. We'll see you on the next explainer.